Let's start with the news that France has decided to supply Ukraine with the first batch of 3 Mirage 2005 aircraft, which will be armed with French Scalp cruise missiles and bombs, as reported by La Tribune. An important point for us is that real French aircraft will be armed with Scalp cruise missiles and French ASM bombs to perform air-to-ground combat missions. However, as I understand it, you will first need to modify the aircraft and train pilots and mechanics. What can you add to that? And in your opinion, by the time the Mirage 2000 is delivered to Ukraine, will France still dare to agree to allow Ukraine to carry out scalpel strikes on the territory of the aggressor country?
Все ж таки надати дозвіл Україні бити скальпами по території країни-агресорки. Тут ми можемо лише припускати.
We can only speculate here. It is possible to start here, in fact, because it was written just a week and a half ago that there will be 12 aircraft. So there is also a guarantee on our own sources. So here again, Paris has not yet officially announced how many Mirage 2000s will be delivered to Ukraine. Only the time frame announced directly by the French Minister of Defense is known. He said it would be in the first quarter of 25 instead of the end of 2024, as the president said back in June. At the same time, he explained the delay by saying that these vehicles will be retrofitted, and the announced list of modernization includes the integration of weapons for striking ground targets. Is to increase resistance to electronic warfare. The total life of the vehicles is up to 20 units, but it has not been officially announced how many will actually be transferred and at what pace.
Безпосередньо, чому такі можуть бути затримки, насправді, тому що, скажімо так, і знов-таки відбиваючись від того, від видання «Але Трибун», воно в попередній публікації говорило, що, мовляв, там не хочуть передавати малу кількість, тому що...
Delays may be due to French President Macron's desire to transfer a significant number of vehicles, rather than just a small amount, as 6 or fewer do not meet his ambitious plans. What's the problem? France is solely responsible for the delivery of these aircraft, while the F-16s were delivered collectively through a coalition of states that included not only donors, such as the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, and Belgium, as well as from many other countries that train Ukrainian pilots, including Romania, will be directly involved. The United States is expanding training sites for Ukrainian pilots on the F-16. France is solving this whole set of problems for Mirage 2005 on its own, finding aircraft in its air force and choosing the place for training Ukrainian pilots on these machines. And this is a very important aspect that few people paid attention to in this publication. They relied on their own sources for the Tribune, but they noted that the training was taking place at the Nancy Air Base. The fact is that this airbase is not a training base at all. It is a combat airbase. French pilots are trained on fighter jets in Cognac outside the city, and that is where the training airbase is located. And Nancy is home to a combat airbase, and it's a Mirage 2000D, not a Mirage 2005, which is operated in another city. This means only one thing. The facilities for training Ukrainian pilots in France have been created virtually from scratch. This may lead to possible complications with the number of pilots and technicians who have been trained. And by the way, the training apparently started at least in the summer of this year. Unofficial information, based on the rather painful French press, did not begin in 2023. The UK has trained 200 Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 fighters, as stated by the Deputy Minister of Defense during the graduation of Ukrainian pilots from the Royal Air Force Primary Flight School. The ambassador of Ukraine, General Valery Zaluzhnyi, was present. We see this photo on our screens. We see a message that this is a primary flight school of the Royal Air Force. What is the next step? This is still a retraining on F-16s. How long do you think it will take? Speaking of these stages of training on the aircraft, how many F-16s do we already have if we rely on any official data that is available, and how many more are planned to be transferred to our country? The number of F-16s currently in the Air Force is not officially reported. Ukraine does not know how many it received in the first batches of planes that were shown in August. After that, there were reports that the first batch of planes from the Netherlands was to arrive. It was also announced that the transfer of planes from Norway in the short term was announced, but it is unknown how many. Regarding these pilots, who, according to the official announcement of the British Defence Secretary, have been trained, he said the number is 200. And it was pilots, because many people may have thought that it was all together with specialists.
Пілотів, які будуть експлуатувати західні машини. Але треба розуміти, що вони, вочевидь, пройшли лише базову підготовку. І це група пілотів, яка у Великій Британії навчалась за іншою програмою.
No, there is a very specific term there, pilots, meaning that we are talking about pilots who will operate Western machines. But you have to understand that they have obviously had only basic training. This is a group of pilots who studied under a different program in the UK, which was rather limited, but was publicly discussed by the Air Force Command.
І вона складалась з випускників Харківського авіаційного училища імені Кожедуба. Тобто це ті
Ukrainian pilots were divided into two groups. The first group included experienced pilots with combat experience who mastered F-16 fighters, while the second, smaller group consisted of recent graduates from the Kharkiv Kozhedub Aviation School, young pilots with no combat experience who have just completed their cadet training.
І вони проходили базову підготовку, саме льотну базову. Спочатку, знов-таки, вони проходили навчання англійської.
They were sent to the UK for standardized training programs, where it was announced that it would take up to 2 years. They were given basic training, first again, English language training, then training on light aircraft. We are talking about basic training, not on fighter jets, but just basic training for a pilot to learn how to pilot aircraft.
Скільки часу пройде до того, щоб цей пілот, який вже вміє літати просто на літаках, опанував бойовий винищувач F-16, залежить від
How long it will take for this pilot, who already knows how to fly airplanes, to master the F-16 combat fighter depends on the answer to the question of whether these pilots have been trained on jet aircraft. If you look at the standard publicly known F-16 training program of the U.S. Air Force, it consists of the fact that after a pilot has mastered a light propeller aircraft, he or she has to learn to fly jet aircraft for another 7 months. If Ukrainian pilots have completed such training in the UK, for example, on Alpha jets, a jet training machine used by the Royal Air Force, they can then immediately go to a flight school, for example, in the US, where they will only take an initial 3-month course. After that, they are trained on AT-38 combat jet aircraft. This is simply so that they can already use the weapons. After that, the 9-month F-16 pilot training course begins. The basic course can be extended by an additional 3 months through special courses, such as breaking through dense enemy air defenses. Thus, the total course will be 12 months if you take all the training on the F-16, so that the pilot is fully certified as a crewman of this aircraft. If we look at the European F-16 pilot training program demonstrated by Romania, the only F-16 training center in Europe, the first graduation lasted only 8 months. This is 1 month shorter than in the United States. This means that Ukrainian pilots who have completed the course in the UK still have to learn and will continue to learn for a long time to master the F-16.
Навчання для курсантів першого випуску тривало лише 8 місяців, тобто на 1 місяць коротше, ніж у США може бути. Тобто от ці саме українські...
The main thing is that we are talking about 200 specialists who will be pilots for Ukrainian aircraft.
Час для того, щоб опанувати F-16. Але головне те, що мова йде про 200.
This removes one of the many but very important problems associated with the fact that the Air Force simply did not have enough pilots who know English at the appropriate level and are ready to retrain and master new machines. For your understanding, this is not even the maximum number. 200 pilots is only what the UK has trained. Such training is ongoing in other countries as well. To them, we need to add the personnel who have already been trained and are being trained on the F-16 with experienced pilots. This number indicates that Ukraine is likely to receive significantly more aircraft from its Western partners than has been announced. If we take what we have been promised, it is 79 F-16s and up to 20 more Mirage 2005s. This is with a very distant perspective, somewhere around 2027, when the last F-16s will be sent. At the same time, if we take at least these 200 pilots, as well as another number, because there are still experienced pilots, then at the rate of 2 pilots per aircraft, the standard proportion of 2 crews per aircraft on duty, Ukraine should receive more aircraft.
То це вже якби навіть за розрахунку 2 пілоти на 1 літак, ну це стандартна така пропорція, щоб було 2 екіпажі на одну машину, щоб була зміна. То це вже якби Україна виходить має отримати більше літальних апаратів.
Lithuania, following Denmark's lead, is investing 10 million euros in the production of a Ukrainian drone missile, the Drone Album. Deputy Defense Minister Serhiy Boyev and his Lithuanian counterpart Monika discussed the financing mechanism.
Відповідний механізм прямого фінансування виробництва обговорили заступник голови Міноборони України з питань європейської інтеграції Сергій Боєв та
What do you think about encouraging partners to invest in our own production of long-range weapons? Will these investments, following the example of the Danish model, really work much faster? The enemy will soon see the results. And can you recall and explain what following the example of the Danish model means? Yes, but we need to start with the right idea for the audience. In the footage, it is not a loaf, but another product that is not entirely Ukrainian. It is an American project with Ukrainian participation. Regarding the loaf and the Danish model, it is important to note that a NATO country is financing the possibility of Ukrainian long-range strikes against Russia, which is already a significant achievement.
Це ключове, країна НАТО фінансує можливість українських далекобійних ударів по Російській Федерації. Це вже шикарно.
Money from NATO to Ukraine to strike at the Russians. And yes, for us, perhaps, in a global long-term perspective, it is more important to receive investments in our own defense and our own production of long-range vehicles. Moreover, when it comes to the loaf, this victim of naming called rocket drone is not a rocket drone. Let's call a spade a spade. It is obviously a ground-launched cruise missile. That is, we are talking about this category of equipment, and all that is known about it is 700, a range of up to 750 kilometers. This is an excellent range, which covers the range to Moscow by about 250 kilometers, so it is a great product. But we still do not know the weight of the warhead. However, let's just say that, in any case, it is a ground-launched cruise missile. Denmark funded the production of 18 Bogdan self-propelled systems in Ukraine this summer. The allocation of funds was necessary because the Ukrainian defense industry can produce more weapons than the state can afford to order. Manufacturers can scale up, but they just need to order more weapons.
цей час грошей у бюджеті не вистачає, і тому от є така унікальна можливість, коли, наприклад, Данія...
At the same time, there is a lack of money in the budget, and therefore there is a unique opportunity. For example, Denmark ordered 18 Bodon systems, and they were ready in a few months. Literally, if I'm not mistaken, about 2 months passed from the moment the order was announced until the Danish Ministry of Defense announced that they were already in the army. That is, the Ukrainian military-industrial complex fulfilled this order at lightning speed. So really, it just means that many countries, for example Lithuania, do not produce weapons practically. They don't actually have their own defense industry, or it's very fragmented. Let's be honest, they don't produce long-range munitions. They buy them from the United States. But they have the opportunity to invest in Ukrainian developments. And it should be understood that if Ukraine wins, its long-range weapons will be in demand, at least because they will be mass-produced and cheap. Oleg, tell us about what is happening on the battlefield.
На Курському напрямку українські медіа повідомили, що Росія залучила стрілецький полк зі складу ракетних військ.
More precisely, in the Kursk sector, Ukrainian media reported that Russia had deployed a rifle regiment from the strategic missile forces to fight in the Kursk sector. The presence of these units was discovered by Russian so-called volunteers, who began to collect resources to support this unit. According to Defense Express, this news is causing a stir because it involves the use of such personnel, who are usually responsible for servicing one of the components of Russia's nuclear triad as ordinary infantry units.
Що взагалі відомо про залучення полку ракетників Росії для боїв на Курщині? Та чи можемо ми тут припускати якусь участь військових з Північної Кореї? Тому що пам'ятаємо заяву від представника ГУР Кирила Буданова про те, що північно-корейські військові вже можуть з'явитися 23 жовтня на території Курської області.
Is it really true, as Defense Express has already concluded, that this indicates a critical shortage of manpower in Russia, if even strategic troops are involved? What is known about the involvement of a Russian missile regiment in the fighting in Kursk? Can we assume any involvement of North Korean troops? We recall the statement of the GRU representative Kirill Budanov about the possible appearance of North Korean troops in the Kursk region on October 23rd. The Russian Federation is engaging the units of the Russian strategic missile forces, which are part of the triad, operating Topol, Yars, and other systems located in mines.
Так, можливо, вважати критичним. Ознакою того, що вони намагаються зібрати гарматне м'ясо по всьому світу, є те, що там...
This is not new for the Russian Federation, as it has previously formed similar units from the Air Force, airfield technicians, and security personnel. This is due to the lack of regular ground forces units to perform the tasks, which indicates attempts to gather cannon fodder around the world.
Перша чверть 21-го століття ми говоримо про торгівлю гарматним м'ясом, як вона є. Тобто Пхеньян передає до Російської Федерації свої війська за даними, які опубліковані.
There is information about mercenaries from many African countries coming from India. The DPRK scandal is related to the trade in cannon fodder conducted by Moscow. According to the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, North Korea is sending its troops to Russia, where they receive basic military training. These troops are representatives of the Special Forces, the most capable units of the DPRK, who are trained for a week or two, up to a maximum of 3 weeks, under Russian commands.
Стислі в межах тижня-двох, максимум 3 тижні. Це таке базове навчання загальновійськової підготовки, під час яких вони навчаються російських команд. Це, до речі, прямо означає те, що вони не будуть, якби ці війська КНДР зібрані в якийсь там експедиційний корпус, якому наріжуть якусь там ділянку на фронті, і він буде за неї відповідати. Такого не буде, очевидь. Мова буде те, що оці корейці, які, до речі, за те, як вже повідомила
This means that DPRK troops will not form an expeditionary corps for the front. According to South Korean intelligence, the Koreans are receiving passports of Yakuts and Buryats, and they will apparently be used together with Russian units in Kursk and possibly in other parts of the front. Of course, this is not because the Russian Federation, let's just say, has no shortage of manpower. They are finding it. And moreover, we must remember that, of course, what is happening in relation to us is more important to us. But we should not forget what exactly Russia is paying off the DPRK with, because the world will probably have to deal with the consequences of such trade for the next 2 centuries.
Скажімо так, світу розгрібати ще найближчі сторіччя 2, напевно. Тому що от за повідомленнями від Головного управління розвідки Міноборони України, то одним з елементів оплати цього гарматного м'яса з боку Москви стала передача ядерних технологій з мініатюризації ядерних боєприпасів для тактичного ядерного озброєння.
According to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry intelligence, one of the ways Moscow pays for cannon fodder is through the transfer of technologies for the miniaturization of nuclear munitions for tactical weapons. This could include the transfer of technology to the DPRK to create nuclear artillery munitions of 152 or 170 millimeters caliber for their artillery systems. After all, they have missiles, and they are very heavy. To understand, there is a version of the KN-23 with a warhead of 4.5 tons, so it is not a problem to put a nuclear warhead there in principle. The trick here is that they have a huge number of artillery systems, and adding nuclear warheads to them would be a disaster for South Korea.
Тому що, банально там 170-мм гаубиця, як
Because a trivial 170-millimeter howitzer, if I'm not mistaken, is called a coxswain and has a range of 60 kilometers with an active reactive projectile. This means that this howitzer can easily fire without even approaching the front line, where the militarized zone is, and strike Seoul with nuclear munitions. This would be a disaster for South Korea, because they have invested huge resources in destroying and intercepting ballistic missiles. But a situation where they just need to hunt for artillery will lead to serious problems. We are talking about 8,500 large-caliber guns that can fire artillery. It will be a disaster for them, because it is impossible to conduct such a counter-battery fight. There are no mass-produced technologies for intercepting artillery shells, and they will not be physically able to accomplish the task of moving, for example, the DPRK's artillery away from their cities. There is a 4 kilometers wide demilitarized zone, one of the most heavily mined in the world, fortified on both sides. Breaking through it is a task for several days with heavy losses. Pyongyang's acquisition of technology or ready-made nuclear artillery munitions with a yield of 2-3 kilotons based on Soviet models or up to 40 kilotons, as in the United States, would be a disaster for South Korea. Given that the DPRK will begin to spread this technology around the world, we will be dealing with these consequences for a very long time. And we is humanity. An international response from the US and South Korea is needed. South Korea has threatened to take the DPRK to international court for sending troops to Russia. However, there has been no further reaction to what is happening.
І більш ніякої реакції поки що немає на те, що відбувається.
Oleg, thank you for joining.
Дякую за ваші думки.
Oleg Katkov, editor-in-chief of Defense Express, was with us.